They say your life flashes before your eyes when you die. They lied. What flashed before mine was someone else's face, and it wasn't mine to forget. My name is Rabbi Eliav Abrams. For 38 years, I taught Torah in a modest synagogue tucked behind a gas station in New Rochelle, New York. Every Wednesday night, I'd sit in a circle with 10 men who clung to tradition like a raft in a storm. We'd read Rambam by candlelight. We'd argue. We'd cry. We believed we were holding the line, preserving the sacred in a world that had forgotten how to bow. I was not a man of visions, not a mystic. I scoffed at those who filled their teachings with dreams and symbols, as if the divine had nothing better to do than send parables in the night. I believed in the structure, the law, the known. But something happened to me, and I don't know how to tell it without shaking. It began with a pain. A sharp, searing flame that stabbed behind my left eye one morning in February. I had just finished morning prayers and was pouring coffee when the world bent, not spun, not blurred, but bent, like light through broken glass. My knees buckled. My skull screamed. The next thing I remember was the sterile ceiling of Mount Sinai Hospital and my wife, Miriam, repeating my name like a mantra she no longer believed in. I had suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. I was gone for nearly 4 minutes. They brought me back. They say it was a miracle. They don't know what they brought back. The dreams started immediately. The first one came the night I returned home. I was lying in my recliner, still tethered to machines, when I opened my eyes, and I was no longer in my house. I stood in a corridor, endless and pale. The walls were breathing. Not metaphorically, I could see them inhale and contract, like the lungs of some colossal, unseen being. The floor beneath me rippled, like water trying to remember how to be stone. There was no sound, and yet I heard 1,000 whispers curling around me, like smoke reciting secrets. I walked. I had no choice. My legs moved on their own. The hallway narrowed. The whispers grew louder. One word repeated among the others. Why? And then, the hallway opened. I stepped into a vast chamber without a ceiling. The sky above was pitch black, but littered with stars that pulsed as if they were alive. And in the center of the room was a table, long, wooden, ancient. At it sat 3 figures. Hooded. Motionless. Their hands were on books, but they did not read. They stared at me. And then, one lifted its head. I didn't see a face. I saw light. Blinding, humming, thinking light. It knew me. It spoke without speaking. You teach of me as if you've seen me. But you are blind. Would you know what truth tastes like, if it burned? I fell to my knees. I couldn't breathe. The air thickened, like judgment. I tried to recite the Shema. The words turned to ash in my throat. And then I saw it. Behind the figure, in the light, hung a shape I could not understand. At first, it looked like a tree. Then like a man. Then like both. Crucified. Glorious. Terrible. My heart exploded with terror and awe. And just before the dream shattered into waking, I heard my name, spoken by a voice I had never heard, and yet always known. Eliav, why do you war against what you do not understand? I woke up soaked in sweat. Miriam found me sobbing. I told no one. But the dreams continued. And the face I saw in that light, it was not the God I thought I served. And yet every cell in my being screamed, this is the one. It wasn't the dream that broke me. It was the silence afterward, the kind of silence that only follows a truth too sacred to speak aloud. The next morning, I did what any rational man does when the irrational knocks. I ignored it. I shaved. I buttoned my shirt. I looked into the mirror and tried to find the lines in my face that still looked like mine. But something in my eyes, something behind them, stared back too long, too knowingly. I arrived early at the synagogue. Earlier than usual. Earlier than necessary. Temple Beth El wasn't grand. A flat-roof building next to a pawn shop, with a parking lot that always seemed 3 spaces too small. But it was home. It was safe. Or so I thought. I walked past the empty sanctuary, past the darkened classrooms, and stopped at the ark. I don't know why, I never do this. But I approached the curtain, the parachute, and stood before it with a weight in my chest I couldn't name. I reached out and drew the curtain aside. The Torah scrolls stood tall in their silver crowns, untouched, revered. But behind them, at the very back of the ark, something caught my eye. Something I never noticed before, a small, faint crack in the wood. It was barely visible, like a line drawn in hesitation. And at the base, just behind where the scrolls rested, I saw glass? No. Not glass. A mirror. It was hidden, old, dusty, warped. Like it had been placed there and forgotten. Or hidden on purpose. I leaned closer. And what I saw wasn't my reflection. I saw him. The same figure from my dream. The same burning presence. But this time, it was a faint outline, almost a shadow, standing behind me, not in front. A form of a man. A crucified man. A radiance contained in pain. I stumbled backward, my shoulders striking the scrolls. One of the crowns clanged to the ground, and the noise, that sudden, human sound, broke the trance. And still, no one came. That night, I locked my study and opened every book I had spent a lifetime collecting. Not the mystical ones. The practical ones. Rashi. Maimonides. The Zohar, though I had long dismissed its metaphors as spiritual poetry rather than literal flame. But something was happening to me. And the books no longer answered. They only echoed. He is the light that was rejected. The stone the builders refused. The name we dared not utter in full. These weren't verses I remembered. They weren't in the margins. They were appearing on the pages. Or perhaps had always been there, and now I could see. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every shadow in my home seemed to lean toward me. Every reflection, window, glass, even spoons, carried his outline. That terrible, beautiful outline. And worst of all, I felt something waking up inside me. A knowledge deep and ancient that I had spent my entire life suppressing. That we had missed him. Not once. But again and again. The next time I opened my siddur to pray, the letters rearranged themselves before my eyes. I blinked. Rubbed them. No use. The alephs bent into crosses. The vavs bled down the page. The tetragrammaton, the holy four-letter name, shattered like glass into 1,000 unpronounceable syllables. And in the center of it all, I saw one name, written in fire, but without smoke. Yeshua. The silence in my study became unbearable. And then I heard it, behind me, a whisper that wasn't a voice but an ache. He came to his own. And his own received him not. I turned. But there was only the mirror. And in it, I no longer saw myself. There are two kinds of fear. The first is when something threatens your life. The second is when something threatens your truth. I had only ever known the first, until now. The following Friday evening, I stood before the congregation. I recited the Kabbalat Shabbat prayers. My voice did not tremble, but my soul did. The melodies, once warm, now tasted metallic. Like a song sung through clenched teeth. There was a pressure in the room I couldn't name, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then it happened. I began the Amidah, the central prayer, and when I reached the line, "Blessed are you, Lord our God, the shield of Abraham," I saw his face again. Not in the heavens. Not in a dream. Standing at the back of the synagogue. No one else saw him. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just was, like a memory that hadn't happened yet. He wore no crown, no robe. Just plain, ancient clothes. And his hands, dear God, his hands still bore the holes. I froze. I forgot the next line. The silence stretched, uncomfortable. People looked up. Some thought I was pausing for emphasis. Others whispered. But I was staring at the veil between two worlds, now thin as spider silk. Then, in a blink, he was gone. But the damage was done. That night, I left the synagogue through the back door, my tallis still draped around my shoulders. The wind was bitter. The moon hid. I didn't drive. I walked. I didn't know where. My feet carried me into the residential streets like a sleepwalker. That's when I heard the footsteps. Behind me. Soft. Rhythmic. Deliberate. I turned, no one. But I knew. He was walking with me. Or rather, I was walking in his footsteps. I reached a street I didn't recognize. A cul-de-sac with no lights. Just trees looming like silent judges. There, in the center, was a house I'd never seen, or perhaps had forgotten. The porch light flickered as I approached. The door was unlocked. I stepped inside. And instantly I knew, this was not a house. It was a memory. Or a vision. Or both. Inside, the walls were covered in scrolls, but not Hebrew. Ancient languages I had studied and dismissed, Greek, Aramaic, even Latin. On the table, a torn page from Isaiah 53 blood-stained. And above the fireplace, a veil. Thin. Silk-like. Glowing. I approached it. And behind that veil, I could feel breath. Not wind. Not air conditioning. Breath. As if someone stood waiting, inches away. I reached for it. And a voice, not mine, whispered from inside me. He is not coming. He has come. And you led them away. I collapsed. I didn't faint. I collapsed. Like a man crushed beneath the weight of his own denial. I awoke on a bench outside a 24-hour pharmacy. Miriam came to get me. I didn't tell her where I'd been. I wasn't sure it even existed. But that night, back in our home, I tore open the drawer beside my bed and pulled out a book I swore I'd never read again. The New Testament. I flipped past Matthew. Past Luke. To John. And I read. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But to as many as received him, to them he gave power to become the sons of God. And for the first time in my life, I wept not from confusion, but from recognition. There are wounds we carry that never bleed. Wounds that open only when light touches them. I didn't know I had one, until he looked at me. After that night, I began to speak less and listen more. To everything. To the rustling of trees. To the voices on the subway. To the children's laughter outside our building. Every sound carried a secret. Every silence was a parable. I stopped teaching for a while. The board said I was recovering from stress. A few murmured about a breakdown. Some suggested retirement. No one asked directly. Perhaps they saw something in my eyes they didn't want mirrored in theirs. But I wasn't unraveling. I was remembering. Late one night, I found myself at the synagogue again. Alone. I don't even remember unlocking the door. I stepped into the sanctuary, not as a rabbi, not even as a man, but as someone called. I approached the ark. The same mirror behind the scrolls now reflected not my face, but a wound. A deep one. Across the chest. Carved with no blade. A spiritual gash. And from it scripture poured. It was not blood. It was word. Verses I knew, but now they burn. He was despised and rejected of men. A man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. But he was wounded for our transgressions. Bruised for our iniquities. They were all there. Isaiah's forbidden chapter. The one we skipped. The one we glossed over during Haftorah readings. And I saw, truly saw, how perfectly it described the one I met. Not as metaphor. Not as messianic speculation. But as biography. It was him. It had always been him. And then I remembered something I hadn't allowed myself to think about in decades. I was 17. It was summer. My older cousin Daniel had returned from Jerusalem, changed. He told me, in whispered defiance, that he had begun to follow Yeshua of Nazareth. He said he had found the Messiah? I laughed in his face. And worse, I told our uncle. Daniel was disowned by the end of the week. We never saw him again. That night in the synagogue, I fell to my knees before the ark and cried not for doctrine, but for Daniel. For the hidden wound in him that I helped deepen. And then, in the dark, I felt it. A hand? On my shoulder. Not physical. Not cold. But real. Warm with eternity. I didn't turn around. I didn't dare. But I heard the voice again, not as thunder, not as command. As a whisper inside the soul. You've carried your wound long enough. Will you carry mine? I broke. Everything inside me shattered like the second tablets of Moses. Not because of guilt. Because of mercy. Because I realized. He had been there, waiting, behind the veil of my theology, behind the scaffolding of my pride, behind every verse I twisted to avoid seeing him. And now, the veil was torn. I lay there until dawn, bathed in the first light of morning. I had no answers. Only awe. Only the wound, and the beginning of its healing. Some people speak of callings like soft melodies in the night. Mine came like thunder over sand, carried on the wind from a place older than time. And it sounded like a shofar. After that night in the synagogue, I stopped pretending. I could no longer be two people, rabbi and seeker, gatekeeper and wanderer, lawgiver and witness. I withdrew from the congregation. I told them I needed to enter a period of hitbodedut, personal seclusion. They nodded solemnly. No one questioned it. But I saw it in their eyes. They were relieved. The man before them was no longer the man they had trusted. And they were right. Because that man was dead. I drove west with no plan. Through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana. I crossed into Illinois and found myself staring across flat fields that seemed to stretch beyond logic. Eventually, I stopped in a small town outside Springfield. A place with no name worth remembering. One gas station. One church. And a dry, cracked land that looked like it hadn't cried in years. It reminded me of the Negev. Of the desert. Of where everything begins. I rented a cabin with no internet and no reception. Just books, a journal, and silence. And it was in that silence, not dramatic, not cinematic, just endless and hollow, that I began to hear it. A sound. At first I thought it was tinnitus. A ringing in my ears. But it grew. It was not sharp. Not loud. It was deep. Ancient. A resonance that bypassed my hearing and shook something in my bones. A blast. A note. Like a shofar. But not the kind we blow on Rosh Hashanah. This was not a call to repentance. It was a summons. One night, I had a vision, not a dream. I was standing in the wilderness. Not metaphorically. A real desert. The sky was bruised with red. The earth cracked like dry lips. In the distance, a man in camel hair walked barefoot through the sand. He turned to me. His eyes were wild. Not with madness, with certainty. He raised a ram's horn to his lips and blew. The sound was unbearable. It tore through me, a sound not meant for human ears. And then he cried out, not to me, but to the heavens. Prepare the way of the Lord! The ground shook. The sky split. And from the torn sky, a figure descended. But not as light this time. As fire. Not consuming, but refining. I fell on my face. And again, for the third time, I heard my name. Eliav. Do not return to the temple. Become one. I awoke on the cabin floor. My face was wet with tears. My hands gripped the pages of my open Bible. New Testament. Again. But this time, it was the book of Revelation. And the verse my fingers clutched. Behold, he comes with clouds, and every eye shall see him, even those who pierced him. In that moment I understood. The call I heard was not to study. Not to teach. But to proclaim. Not religion. Not tradition. But him. The one who was pierced. The one we refused. The one returning. Not just for the world. But for us. The desert had spoken. The shofar had sounded. And I could never go back. Truth does not come with fanfare. It comes like a thief, not to steal, but to reveal what we never truly owned. I returned to New York, but not to resume my old life. I returned to say goodbye to it. Miriam met me at the door. She didn't ask questions. She saw it in my eyes, that something had passed through me, or rather, that I had passed through something. She touched my face and whispered, "You look like your father the day he buried his tzitzit." I knew what she meant. There are moments when a man stops being an echo of his ancestors, and becomes a voice of his own. That evening I packed my study. Books. Files. Fragments of sermons I would never give again. But before closing the final box, I did one last thing. I took the Torah scroll, the same one that had stood silently behind the mirror, and I opened it to Exodus. "And they shall make for me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." I looked into the parchment, and saw what I had missed all my life. That he never wanted walls. He wanted presence. Later that week, I was invited to speak. Not by a synagogue. Not by a church. By Daniel. Yes, that Daniel. He had found me. He had seen something, heard something, somehow, and sent a quiet invitation. "Come. Tell your story. No title. No robe. Just come." I walked into a small gathering space in Queens. Nothing ornate. No stained glass. No ark. Just chairs. Quiet people. Eyes that had seen desert too. They gave me no script. No pulpit. Just a microphone. My hands trembled. I looked at them, Jews, Christians, exiles, seekers. And I said the words I never thought would pass my lips. "My name is Eliav Cohen. I was a rabbi. And I missed the Messiah. But he did not miss me." There was no applause. No emotional outburst. Just silence. The holy kind. Then I spoke of the dreams. The visions. The mirror behind the ark. The voice that called my name. And finally I said, "I know many of you have been wounded by religion. So was I. But there is a man, a scarred man, who wears a crown not to rule with iron, but to heal with fire. And he is not coming. He has come." Afterward, a woman approached me. Older. Eyes like iron and tears. She asked, "Do you regret it?" I said, "Regret is for mistakes. This was a revelation." She nodded. And left. That night, I stood alone on a rooftop in Brooklyn. I looked up at the stars. No veil between us. I whispered the Shema. "Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." And I added, not in rebellion but in awe, "And the face of that one is named Yeshua." They asked me later, "Are you still a rabbi?" I said, "No. Now I'm just a man who saw the face behind the crown, and lived to speak of it."